A morning in a billionaire's mansion turns into a nightmare. When his young son suddenly stops responding, doctors are called, panic takes over, and no one has answers. Until a quiet maid walks in, sees what everyone missed, and completely changes the fate of that child. What she reveals leaves the entire house in shock. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. It was supposed to be just another normal morning at the Graves mansion. The sunlight came through the large windows and spread across the living room. Toys were lying all over the soft carpet, showing that a child had been playing there recently. 3-year-old Noah was fast asleep on the couch, hugging his favorite toy. The house was calm. Everything felt like a normal day. Richard, Noah's father and a very wealthy man, came into the room with a smile. He bent down to gently wake his son for breakfast. He expected a sleepy smile or maybe a yawn, but Noah didn't move. Richard kissed his forehead. Still no reaction. He nudged him softly, then a bit harder. Nothing changed. He called his name again, louder now. A strange feeling started to build in his chest. Something was wrong, but he didn't want to believe it. He tried once more to wake Noah, but the boy remained completely still. Richard's heart began to race. Panic took over quickly, replacing all the calm he felt just minutes earlier. He picked Noah up in his arms, hoping the movement would wake him, but the boy's body was limp. Richard shouted for help, his voice filled with fear. He yelled louder, his voice echoing through the halls of the mansion. Servants came running, unsure of what was happening. Richard clutched Noah tightly, almost afraid to let go. His breathing became unsteady as tears began to roll down his face. This couldn't be happening. He had already lost too much. Memories of the day his wife died in childbirth came rushing back. That pain, that helplessness. It was all returning now. His body trembled as he cried. He had never felt this helpless before. His mind refused to accept what his eyes were seeing. Noah, his only son, wasn't waking up. As the panic spread, the private medical team was quickly called. Within minutes, they were rushing into the living room with their equipment. They laid Noah down and began checking his vital signs. Richard stood beside them, unable to stop crying. He kept asking if his son was okay, but no one gave him a clear answer. The doctor's face was serious, focused. They used machines to scan and check for any signs of consciousness. Richard felt like the world had stopped moving. Every second felt like an hour. He watched, barely breathing, hoping for any sign of movement, but nothing happened. The doctors whispered to each other, which only made Richard more scared. He didn't understand what was going on. He just wanted Noah to open his eyes and smile again. More staff gathered around the room. Everyone was quiet now, watching the scene unfold. The atmosphere was heavy. Even the youngest servants knew something was terribly wrong. Richard was on his knees beside the couch, holding Noah's little hand. He spoke softly to his son, telling him everything would be okay. He begged him to wake up, promised him toys, trips, anything he wanted. But Noah remained motionless. Richard looked completely broken. He was not the powerful billionaire anymore. He was just a father in pain. The medical team continued their work, but their expressions became more grim with each passing moment. No one wanted to say what they were thinking. Richard's crying became louder. He repeated the same questions over and over, but no one answered. Then, something unexpected happened. One of the housemaids stepped into the room. She had been working in the kitchen and didn't know what was going on until she heard the yelling. When she saw Richard crying and the doctors around Noah, she froze for a second. Then she stepped forward. Her name was Clara, a quiet woman who had worked for the family for years. She walked over slowly and knelt beside Richard. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she looked closely at Noah. Her eyes didn't show fear. She gently placed a hand on the boy's chest, then felt his wrist. Richard looked at her, confused and desperate. The doctors noticed her too, and one of them asked her to step back. But Clara didn't move. Something in her face had changed. She whispered something under her breath. What Clara said next caught everyone off guard. She asked the doctors to stop for a moment and let her speak. Richard, still crying, looked at her like she was crazy. But her voice was calm and firm. She said she had seen something like this before, long ago. Something that looked like sleep, but wasn't. She didn't use any big words. She just said Noah needed something different. The doctors hesitated, unsure of what to do. Richard didn't know what to believe, but something about Clara's calm voice made him listen. He moved aside and let her get closer to Noah. Clara took a deep breath and placed both her hands on the boy's forehead. No one knew what she was doing, but she seemed confident. Everyone in the room stayed silent, watching Clara closely. She closed her eyes and remained still for a few seconds. Then she spoke softly again, words that didn't make sense to anyone there. Richard watched in silence, his heart full of fear and hope. Clara opened her eyes and looked at Noah. She whispered his name. Still, nothing happened. Then, for a brief moment, Noah's fingers twitched. It was so small that only Clara and Richard noticed it. Clara smiled faintly and told them it wasn't over. She said they needed to stay calm and wait. Richard didn't know what to think. But for the first time that morning, a tiny bit of hope returned. Something had changed. And now, everyone was looking at Clara, the quiet maid, like she might be the only one who could change everything. Her name was Clara. She had been working at the Graves mansion for only 6 months. She was hired to do simple cleaning tasks, sweeping the floors, organizing rooms, wiping furniture, and sometimes helping in the kitchen when it got busy. Clara never made much noise. She arrived early, worked quietly, and left on time. She didn't talk much with the other staff, and she rarely got involved in any conversation. Most people didn't even notice her when she passed by. To them, she was just the quiet cleaner who kept to herself. She had no fancy background, no visible connections, and no one knew much about where she came from. She lived in a small apartment in the city and took the same bus to work every morning. In the eyes of others, Clara was invisible, just another worker in a big house filled with luxury, noise, and important people who rarely looked her way. What no one at the Graves mansion knew was that Clara had once worked in healthcare. Years before she came to the mansion, she had been a nursing technician at a public hospital in a busy neighborhood. She used to deal with emergencies, help doctors, monitor patients, and take care of people during hard moments. She had learned how to stay calm in chaotic situations. But all of that ended after her younger sister died in that same hospital. It had been a mistake, a medical error that no one fully explained. Clara never recovered from it. She blamed the system, the doctors, and herself for not being able to prevent it. Since that day, she refused to wear a uniform again. She quit her job, cut ties with everyone from that part of her life, and started looking for work outside the medical field. For years, she avoided everything related to hospitals. No clinics, no medicine, nothing. Now, standing in the Graves mansion with a lifeless child on the couch and a father in panic, something inside Clara came back to life. She didn't plan it. It just happened. Her eyes noticed details that others didn't. She stepped closer to Noah when she saw the medical team doing their checks. The machines made noise, the doctors whispered to each other, and Richard kept crying without getting any real answers. But Clara wasn't looking at the machines. She was looking at Noah. She noticed that his chest moved slightly, very slowly, but in a steady rhythm. His breathing wasn't gone. It was weak but consistent. His skin was pale but not cold. There were no bruises, no cuts, no marks that would show trauma. Her instinct told her this wasn't a normal medical emergency. Clara had seen too many real emergencies before. Something about this one felt off, like it didn't follow the usual pattern. She didn't want to interfere. She knew she wasn't a nurse anymore, and this wasn't her responsibility. But something didn't let her stay quiet. She stepped forward, even when others told her to stay back. One of the doctors told her this wasn't her place. Clara ignored him. She wasn't trying to act like a doctor. She just wanted them to stop and look again. She calmly explained what she saw. Weak but steady breathing, no trauma signs, no fever, no unusual heart rate. She told them this didn't look like a seizure or a coma. It looked like something else, something they weren't seeing. Richard was desperate and willing to listen to anyone. He told the doctors to let her speak. Clara leaned down and placed her hands gently on Noah's chest and wrist. She stayed there for a moment, eyes focused, feeling the boy's condition. Her hands weren't shaking. She was calm and serious. She asked a few questions no one expected. She wanted to know what Noah had eaten the night before, whether he had been sick recently, or if he had been playing with anything strange. The staff exchanged looks, but started answering. Clara listened carefully. Nothing made sense. The boy had gone to bed happy and healthy. He hadn't fallen, hadn't hit his head, hadn't been sick. The room where he slept was clean and locked. It didn't add up. Clara asked if the mansion had been sprayed for insects or cleaned with any new chemicals. A maid said yes. They had used a stronger product 2 days ago in the playroom. Clara's expression changed. She asked if Noah had played in that room yesterday. The answer was yes. Clara didn't speak for a second. Then she asked for the label of the product. Someone ran to get it. When it came, Clara read the ingredients and found something alarming. One of the chemicals was known to cause reactions in sensitive children. The doctors were now paying attention. Clara told them what she thought. Noah might have had a toxic reaction, not enough to kill, but enough to shut down his body temporarily, a sort of chemical-induced sleep. It would explain the low heart rate, weak breathing, and lack of other symptoms. The doctors looked at the label again, then at Noah. One of them admitted he hadn't considered that. Clara wasn't proud or angry. She just wanted to help. She asked if they had a specific antidote or a way to flush the chemical from his system. One of the doctors nodded and ran to prepare the treatment. Richard stared at Clara like he was seeing her for the first time. She was just the cleaning lady. But now she was the one who noticed what the others didn't. She didn't want praise. She just wanted the boy to be okay. As the treatment began, everyone in the room became quiet. Clara stood in a corner, watching but not interfering anymore. Her part was done. The doctors were now focused, working fast. Richard kept holding Noah's hand, whispering to him. After a few minutes, the boy's eyelids twitched, then his fingers moved again. A soft, slow breath came from his mouth, stronger this time. Richard gasped and called for Clara, but she didn't move. She stayed where she was, silently observing. The doctors confirmed that Noah was responding to the treatment. The worst part was over. Richard turned to thank Clara, but she had already stepped back into the background. Just like before, she blended in, invisible again. No one there would forget what she did. But Clara didn't want thanks or recognition. For her, it was just something she had to do. She looked at Noah one last time and walked away. A few days before the incident with Noah, the Graves family had hired a new nurse to take care of him. The decision came after recommendations from a private clinic the family trusted for years. She arrived with perfect credentials, polite manners, and a calm voice that put people at ease. Her name was Beatrice. She was in her late 20s, always wore her white uniform neatly, and carried a clipboard wherever she went. Richard approved the hiring without much questioning. He was trying to make sure Noah had the best care, especially after losing his wife. The house staff accepted Beatrice quickly. She was respectful, soft-spoken, and never caused any trouble. At first, she seemed like a good choice. Noah seemed to like her too. She read him books, played simple games, and followed strict schedules for food and medicine. No one had any reason to doubt her at the beginning. At least, not until that morning. Clara, however, had a different feeling. When she first saw Beatrice, something about her felt familiar. It bothered Clara, but she couldn't place the memory right away. She spent the next few days thinking about it, trying to figure out where she had seen that face before. Then she remembered. Years ago, when Clara still worked as a nursing technician, there had been a case at a neighborhood hospital involving serious accusations. A young nurse was being investigated after several patients had strange reactions to common medications. Some had seizures, others passed out with no explanation. There were whispers about someone changing the doses, mixing the wrong drugs, or using expired products. Clara hadn't worked in that department, but she had heard the name, Beatrice. And now, that same person was walking through the Graves mansion, trusted with the care of a child. The memory made Clara uneasy, but she kept quiet. She didn't have proof. Not yet. That morning, when Noah wouldn't wake up, Clara's focus turned sharply to Beatrice. While the doctors and servants tried everything they could to wake the child, Beatrice stood nearby. Her hands were slightly shaking as she held a cloth and stood by the medical team, but her face didn't show shock. She didn't cry or panic. Her eyes just followed the scene without emotion. It was strange. Even the least experienced maid looked more nervous than she did. Clara watched her carefully. Beatrice didn't ask questions, didn't try to help. She just stayed quiet, almost too calm. Clara felt something was wrong. The behavior didn't match the situation. A nurse who cared about her patient would be trying to help, or at least be visibly worried. Beatrice wasn't doing either. Clara's concern turned into suspicion. She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but she had seen enough in her past to know when something didn't add up. As time passed and Noah remained unresponsive, Richard grew more desperate. The doctors were focused on machines and lab results. They were talking about sedatives, possible infections, and rare conditions. No one suspected foul play. Clara realized that if someone had done something on purpose, it would go unnoticed. She stepped away from the crowd and went to Noah's room. She started checking things slowly, his toys, his water bottle, his medications. Everything looked normal, but something bothered her. She found the box of pills Beatrice had been giving Noah. It was supposed to be a simple vitamin supplement. Clara opened the box and looked at the pills. The label was correct, but the pills didn't match what she remembered from when she worked in hospitals. These were smaller, coated in a different color. She took one and placed it in her apron pocket. She needed to test it, or at least compare it. Something wasn't right. Back in the living room, Clara watched Beatrice again. She remembered moments from her hospital days, how small mistakes could turn into tragedies, and how professionals who acted too perfect were often hiding something. Clara knew that speaking up would change everything. She had spent years pretending to be just a cleaner. She had hidden her past to avoid the pain of losing her sister, the trauma of medical errors, and the responsibility that came with it. But now, a child's life was at risk. She couldn't stay quiet anymore. She walked up to Richard and the head doctor. Her voice was steady and her eyes were serious. She told them she used to be a nurse and that she needed to speak in private. At first, they hesitated, but Richard, seeing how calm and focused she was, asked everyone to step back. Clara showed him the pill, explained what she noticed, and shared what she remembered about Beatrice's past. Richard was shocked, but also confused. He wanted to believe the best in the people around him. Still, he listened. He called the doctor to examine the pill. Within minutes, the team confirmed that the substance inside was not what the label claimed. It had mild sedative properties, not strong enough to kill, but strong enough to slow body functions in a small child. Clara's suspicion had been right. Richard turned to Beatrice, who stood still, expressionless. She didn't deny anything. She simply said she was following instructions from the clinic. That didn't make things better. Security was called, and Beatrice was removed from the house. The doctor gave Noah another treatment, and soon his condition began to improve. Clara stood at a distance, quietly watching again. But this time, people saw her. They saw more than just a maid. They saw someone who saved a life by speaking up when no one else did. Everyone in the mansion was getting ready to take Noah to the hospital. The doctors were organizing transport, the staff was packing essential items, and Richard was pacing nervously, not knowing what else to do. The tension in the house was growing by the minute. People were shouting instructions, phones were ringing, and the private ambulance was on its way. Clara stood near the hallway, watching the chaos unfold, her mind racing. She knew there wasn't much time. If they took Noah to a hospital, the truth might be lost or covered up. She needed to act before that happened. She took a deep breath, walked directly to Richard, and asked to speak with him in private. He looked confused, but something in her eyes made him nod. They walked into his office, and Clara quietly closed the door behind them. It was time to tell him everything. No more hiding, no more waiting. Clara stood still for a moment, trying to find the right words. Then she told him the truth. She explained how she used to work as a nursing technician. She had experience in emergency care, patient monitoring, and medication handling. She told him about the time she saw patients suffer because of careless decisions. One of those mistakes led to her sister's death. That moment broke her. She couldn't stay in that profession anymore, so she left everything behind and started working simple jobs. Cleaning houses was a way to stay away from the world of medicine. When she applied to the Graves mansion, she never planned to get involved with medical matters again. But now, watching Noah in this state, all those memories came back. She couldn't ignore what she saw. The signs were clear to her. Slow breathing, deep unresponsiveness, but a stable body. These were symptoms she had seen before, and they were not natural. She told Richard her suspicion. Noah was not sick. He had been drugged. Clara explained how the symptoms matched exposure to microdoses of sedatives. These substances were strong enough to weaken the body, but not kill. They caused confusion, sleepiness, and shallow breathing. Most doctors, if not looking for it, would miss it and assume the child was just unwell. Clara had seen these reactions during her years at the hospital. She had even heard of people using these drugs on purpose, to keep patients calm, quiet, or in some cases, to manipulate a situation. Richard sat down heavily on his chair. His face was pale and his hands were shaking. He kept asking why this would happen. Why would someone hurt a child who had no enemies, no conflicts? Clara waited until he was quiet, then looked at him straight and answered with a calm, serious voice. "Because you are a billionaire," she said, "and that child is the key to your inheritance." At first, he looked confused, as if the words didn't make sense. But then, as he thought more about it, the pieces started to come together. He remembered the legal documents, the family arguments, and the way some relatives had shown more interest in Noah than in the boy's well-being. He remembered the inheritance contract that listed Noah as the primary heir if anything ever happened to Richard. That money was worth billions. Clara could see in Richard's eyes that he understood what this meant. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a medical emergency. This was an intentional act. Someone had planned it, quietly and carefully. Richard asked her again if she was sure. Clara nodded. She wasn't guessing. She had seen enough to know when something like this was happening. Her voice remained steady. "This is not a sickness. This is a controlled attack." He couldn't believe what he was hearing, but deep down he knew it was true. It explained too much. It explained the strange calmness of the nurse, the slow symptoms, the timing of everything. He looked up at Clara with tears in his eyes, and asked who would do something like this. Clara said she didn't know yet, but it had to be someone with access, someone who knew the routines, the medication schedules, and the child's condition, someone close enough to switch pills or mix something without being noticed. She told him that if they moved Noah now, the hospital might not find the real cause. The drugs might already be disappearing from his system. They needed to act quickly and quietly. Clara said she would stay and help, but they needed to be smart. This was no longer just about saving the child. It was about finding the person responsible. Richard stood up and looked out the window for a long moment. His mind was full of questions, anger, and fear. But he also felt something else: determination. He turned back to Clara and asked what they needed to do first. She said they had to stop the ambulance, test the medication, and keep Noah under observation with the right equipment at the mansion. They also had to keep this quiet. If the person responsible found out they were suspicious, they might try again or disappear. Richard nodded. He trusted Clara now more than anyone else. He called the head of security and gave new instructions. Then he told the doctor to stay, but not to share any reports with the clinic. Clara stood by, ready to take the lead. For the first time in years, she was no longer hiding from her past. She was using it to protect a life. Richard now understood this wasn't a random crisis. It was an attack, and someone had planned it carefully. As they left the office together, the rest of the house remained busy. No one outside that room knew the full truth yet. Clara and Richard walked back into the hallway, now with a new plan in mind. They would protect Noah, but they would also find out who had done this. Clara felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders, but she didn't back down. This wasn't about her past anymore. It was about doing what was right now. Richard, still shaken but focused, placed a hand on her shoulder and thanked her. "You saved him," he said. Clara didn't respond. She just looked toward the living room where Noah was being monitored. She knew they had stopped something terrible, but the danger wasn't over. Now, they had to find out who was behind it and why. Richard finally saw the truth. His son hadn't just collapsed, he had been attacked. And it was just the beginning. With Richard's hesitant support, Clara took charge of the situation. She began by carefully reviewing everything Noah had eaten or taken over the past few days. She asked the kitchen staff detailed questions, checked the pantry and fridge, and even looked through the trash for empty containers. Clara went through the nurse's daily notes and matched them with the food and supplement schedule. Patterns started to form. Each time Noah was given juice, soup, or vitamins, it had been directly handled by the new nurse, Beatrice. No one else had touched those items. The kitchen had prepared the meals, but Beatrice had insisted on taking care of the final preparations before serving them to the child. Clara found this very suspicious. Richard, still overwhelmed by everything that had happened, tried to stay calm. He followed Clara, trusting her judgment more with each step. She told him they had no time to waste. Waiting for hospital tests could give their enemy a chance to erase all signs. Clara then told Richard something that made him even more nervous. If they took Noah to the hospital now, it might be too late. Not just because of the delay, but because the nurse could have allies there. Maybe someone from the same clinic. Maybe someone who would hide the evidence or block access to results. Clara had seen things like that in her past life in medicine. Sometimes connections inside the system helped criminals disappear. She said they needed to act immediately, right there in the house. She explained that in the hospital where she used to work, they often had to use emergency detox techniques for patients who had been mildly sedated, whether by accident or for surgery recovery. Clara knew how to create a simple liver detox solution, one that could be given safely to children in very low doses. It wouldn't hurt Noah, but it could help push the sedative out of his system faster. Richard looked unsure but nodded. He asked the head doctor on site if it was safe. The doctor, while surprised by Clara's confidence, agreed that the method she described could help in certain cases. Clara moved quickly. She gathered the ingredients she needed from the medical supplies available in the house. It wasn't a complete hospital-grade setup, but it was enough. She prepared a liquid solution and measured everything with precision. She refused to let anyone else do it. Once it was ready, she explained the process step by step, asked the doctor to supervise, and had Richard present in the room the whole time. Clara slowly administered the detox dose to Noah through a small syringe while he was still unconscious. Then they waited. The entire room was silent. No one dared to move. The seconds felt long. Everyone's eyes were on the little boy lying motionless on the bed, his chest rising and falling slowly. After nearly 20 minutes of tense silence, something happened. Noah's fingers twitched. Clara noticed it first, then pointed it out. A few moments later, the boy's lips moved slightly, and then he coughed. It wasn't loud, but it was real. Richard stood up quickly and grabbed his son's hand. Noah coughed again, and his eyelids began to move. His breathing became deeper, more natural, and then, finally, he opened his eyes. He didn't speak right away, but his face turned to the side, and a soft cry came out. Clara stood frozen, hands still raised, as if she couldn't believe it herself. Richard fell to his knees, overwhelmed with emotion. Tears streamed down his face as he hugged his son gently, afraid to squeeze too tightly. The doctor nodded in silent approval, clearly surprised by Clara's success. The staff in the room stood still, many with tears in their eyes. Noah was alive. Clara had brought him back, but the relief didn't last long. Clara stood up and looked at Richard with a serious expression. "This isn't over," she said. "Someone tried to kill your son, and that person is still inside this house." Her voice was calm but firm. The tension returned instantly. Richard wiped his tears and asked what they should do next. Clara explained that they needed to secure all access points. No one should enter or leave the mansion. Every staff member had to stay where they were until the situation was fully investigated. The nurse had to be questioned immediately. The food had to be tested and all of Noah's belongings examined again. Clara told him they needed to treat the house as a crime scene. Richard agreed. He stood up and ordered security to lock down the property. Clara stepped outside the room and spoke to the head of security. She gave instructions clearly, like someone who had done this before. The entire house shifted from panic to controlled alert. The security team responded quickly. Guards were positioned at every door. All kitchen items were placed under supervision. Clara worked with the doctor to write down the treatment that had saved Noah and what they suspected was used to poison him. She insisted on keeping the remaining juice bottles and supplements as evidence. Richard made calls to trusted investigators and ordered a private forensic team to come as soon as possible. Noah was moved to a safe, controlled room with limited access. Only Clara, Richard, the doctor, and 2 guards were allowed in. The other staff were confused and scared. Whispers filled the mansion. No one knew what was really happening. Beatrice, the nurse, had not been seen since the first signs of Noah's collapse. Clara ordered her room to be searched immediately. Richard authorized everything. The atmosphere in the house was no longer just sad. It was tense and suspicious. Everyone became a potential suspect. As night fell, the house remained in lockdown. For now, Noah was stable, and Clara stayed close, checking on him every hour. Richard couldn't sleep. He kept walking around, talking to security, reviewing camera footage, and going over the schedules from the past week. Clara had saved his son's life, but she had also opened a door to something much bigger. This wasn't just a medical emergency. It was a planned attack. Richard didn't know who was behind it yet, but he would find out, and this time he wouldn't rely on outsiders. He would trust Clara. She had proven she was more than a cleaner. She had become the one person standing between his family and real danger. Noah's small breaths filled the quiet room. He was alive, but now everyone in that house was under watch. The attack had failed, but the enemy was still there, hiding in plain sight. Richard gave a direct order to the mansion's security team. The nurse, Beatrice, was to be kept under close watch, but without raising any suspicion. He didn't want her to know that they were on to her. She continued her usual activities, walking around the house calmly, checking her phone and pretending to be just another medical professional doing her job. But her movements were now being tracked. 2 guards stayed near her at all times, under the excuse of house protocol. Richard stayed close to Noah's room, while Clara moved quickly and quietly through the service hallways. She knew where she needed to go. She headed straight to the medical waste bin, located in the back area of the house, where all used gloves, wrappers, and disposable items were thrown out. She opened the lid and dug through the pile carefully, ignoring the smell. After a few minutes, she found what she was looking for, a used syringe hidden inside a crumpled bag. Clara held the syringe in her gloved hands. There was still a tiny amount of transparent liquid inside the barrel. Most people wouldn't have noticed it, but she did. Her training had taught her that even the smallest traces could hold answers. She placed it gently into a sealed container she had brought with her, then went to her room. Using her old contacts from her nursing days, she made a call. One of her former colleagues worked in a lab that could run private, fast chemical tests. Clara didn't give many details, just asked for an urgent analysis. She arranged for a trusted courier to pick up the syringe immediately and waited. While the house remained under lockdown and the nurse continued pretending nothing was wrong, Clara knew the clock was ticking. If the analysis confirmed what she suspected, this would no longer be just an internal matter. It would become a full criminal case. And they needed more proof before making a move. While waiting for the results, Clara took the next step. She went to Beatrice's room with permission from Richard. The door was unlocked. The room was clean, maybe too clean. Nothing looked out of place at first. Clara searched drawers, the closet under the mattress. Then she opened the nurse's handbag, which had been left on the dresser. Inside, she found cash, a few ID cards, and a notebook. The notebook wasn't like a normal planner. It had notes written in strange codes, symbols and short phrases that didn't make sense right away, but mixed in with the codes, Clara found references to bank names and numbers. Some of the entries were linked to large sums of money, and a few dates matched important events from the Graves family's business calendar. There were reminders marked with circles, names of company directors, and even mentions of Richard's late wife. Clara's eyes widened. This was more than a personal attack. It was connected to the family's fortune. She continued digging through the notebook. In the back, she found a small pocket holding folded papers. One of them was a printed email with travel information. Another had a handwritten list of items, some crossed out. Clara noticed one item listed as child sedation, progressing, with a checkmark beside it. Another line read, legal transition, soon. It was becoming clear this was a carefully planned operation, not an isolated act. Someone had sent Beatrice to get close to the family, harm Noah over time, and possibly trigger a legal change that would affect ownership or control over Richard's empire. Clara took pictures of everything with her phone and then carefully returned the items to their places. She didn't want Beatrice to suspect anything yet. Clara then walked straight to Richard's office and showed him the photos. He was shocked, but not surprised anymore. He was starting to realize how close he had come to losing everything: his child, his company, his future. Later that night, Clara received the lab results. The liquid found in the syringe was confirmed as a type of industrial sedative, stronger than anything used in standard medical care. It wasn't illegal, but it was dangerous, especially in repeated doses. The report showed that the substance could cause slow organ shutdown if administered in small, frequent amounts. Clara now had everything she needed: physical evidence, a witness account, and a motive tied to financial gain. She printed the report and handed it to Richard. He read it in silence, hands trembling. The paper nearly slipped from his grip. "This isn't just betrayal," he said quietly. "This is murder in slow motion." He stood up and called for security. Clara stood beside him, ready. The house was no longer in panic. Now it was in control. They had the proof. Beatrice wasn't a nurse. She was an infiltrator, a trained manipulator with one goal: take out the heir slowly and silently. Richard and Clara knew they couldn't involve the police yet. They needed to trap Beatrice with solid proof and catch her in the act of trying to interfere again. Clara asked for one more day to prepare. They would monitor every move, record every conversation, and isolate every object she touched. The next step was to confront her in a controlled environment, with lawyers, cameras, and witnesses. They couldn't afford a single mistake. Clara felt no fear. Her hands were steady, her mind clear. She had spent years hiding from the world of medicine, but now she was standing in the middle of a medical and criminal mystery, and she was the only one solving it. Richard looked at her with deep respect. "You've done more for my family in 2 days than anyone ever has," he told her. Clara didn't reply. She was focused. The evidence was ready, and she would be the one to bring the truth into the light. With all the evidence collected, Clara knew the time had come to confront the woman who had nearly killed Noah. She didn't want to do it in secret or behind closed doors. This needed to be done in front of everyone, the entire household staff and Richard himself. That way, no one could deny what had happened, and there would be no confusion about the truth. Clara chose the main living room, the one where Noah used to play. She asked for everyone to be gathered there, including the guards, maids, the family doctor, and of course, Beatrice. When the staff were all present, Richard entered the room quietly, holding the folder with the lab results. Clara followed him, holding a bag with the items she had recovered: the syringe, the notebook, and copies of the coded notes. Tension filled the room. Everyone looked around, unsure of what was going on. Clara walked to the center and stood in front of Beatrice. Without giving her time to speak, Clara pointed the hot iron she had just unplugged from the laundry room directly at the nurse and said in a loud, clear voice, "Who are you really?" The room fell silent. The iron was still warm, steam rising from it. Beatrice froze. The rest of the staff stood still, their mouths slightly open in shock. No one moved, no one spoke. The tension broke when Beatrice took a step back, her eyes darting toward the door. She tried to leave the room, but 2 security guards blocked her path immediately. Richard remained quiet for a moment, letting Clara take the lead. Clara's voice was firm. She told everyone that Beatrice had lied about who she was and had slowly been poisoning Noah. The proof, Clara said, was undeniable. Then Richard stepped forward and opened the folder. He read out loud the lab results showing the sedative found in the syringe. His voice was steady, but his face was full of anger. As Richard spoke, Clara opened the bag and pulled out the used syringe. She held it in front of the group, showing the tiny trace of liquid still inside. Then she pulled out copies of the notebook pages, the ones with strange codes and references to financial events linked to the Graves family. She explained how everything fit together: the slow poisoning, the access to the child's food, the coded planning, and the connection to potential financial gain if something happened to Noah. Beatrice began to panic, her calm face twisted with fear. She raised her voice and started yelling that it was all a lie. She said Clara was framing her and that none of this was true, but no one believed her anymore. The evidence was too much. Clara didn't argue. She just looked at her quietly, waiting. Beatrice screamed that she was a nurse and had done nothing wrong, but her voice shook. Her lies had finally lost their power. One of the housemaids stepped back, clearly frightened. Another staff member started crying softly. The scene was hard to watch. A woman who had acted so normal, so trustworthy, was now screaming and shaking in the middle of the room. Clara handed the papers to the doctor, who looked through them carefully and nodded. Everything Clara had said was true. Richard picked up the phone and called the police without hesitation. He told them to come immediately and report to the mansion security on arrival. Beatrice continued shouting that she was innocent, but the guards didn't let her leave. They kept her seated and under watch. No one moved to comfort her. No one stood by her side. The staff, still in shock, began to understand the danger they had all lived with. Richard thanked Clara quietly, his voice full of emotion. She had saved not just his son, but his entire household from something none of them had seen coming. A short time later, the sound of footsteps filled the hallway. The police arrived in plain clothes, escorted in by security. They entered the living room and calmly listened as Richard and Clara explained what had happened. Clara handed over the syringe, the documents, and the photographs. The officers asked Beatrice a few questions, but she had no answers. Her words were scattered, her hands trembling. They placed her in handcuffs and read her rights. She didn't fight back this time. Her eyes were empty. As she was taken away, the rest of the staff stood silently. No one said a word. Clara stood still, her hands clasped in front of her. Richard stood beside her, his face pale but steady. The danger was now out of the house, but the damage would take time to heal. What had happened wasn't just a crime. It was a betrayal of trust, and it had nearly cost them the life of a child. Moments later, the sound of small feet broke the silence. Noah, now fully awake and feeling better, walked into the room. His steps were wobbly, but he smiled when he saw his father. Richard dropped to his knees and opened his arms. Noah ran straight to him, wrapping his arms around his neck. Richard hugged him tightly, unable to hold back the tears. The entire room watched, many crying silently. It was a moment of relief, of gratitude, of realization. Clara stayed where she was, watching them with quiet satisfaction. No applause, no celebration, just the clear truth that the boy had survived because someone had dared to act. Not because of money, not because of power, but because of one woman who had been invisible in that house, a woman with a past she had once hidden. Clara had saved Noah, and everyone there knew it. The forgotten maid had become the reason that little boy was alive. In the days that followed the dramatic confrontation, Clara gave her full statement to the police and investigators. She explained everything she had seen, suspected, and discovered. The used syringe, the coded notebook, the nurse's unusual behavior, the financial documents, all of it was shared in detail. The investigation expanded quickly. The authorities didn't take long to confirm Clara's fears. Beatrice wasn't working alone. She was part of a larger international group that targeted children who were heirs to large fortunes. The group operated quietly, using professionals like private nurses, tutors, and caregivers to get close to the children. They administered controlled doses of sedatives or toxins over time, making the child weaker and sicker each day. The goal was simple and terrifying: cause a death that looked natural and then take advantage of the confusion and emotional chaos to access inheritance funds, life insurance payouts, or other financial assets. It was a cold, professional system, and Noah had almost become one of its victims. The group had already been connected to other suspicious deaths across different countries. Some children had died from unknown illnesses, and their families had never received clear answers. Now, with the evidence collected at the Graves mansion, the authorities had what they needed to connect the dots. Beatrice was just one part of something much bigger. For Richard, the truth was devastating. He had built his empire with discipline and trust in professionals. Now that trust had nearly cost him the life of his only child. He found it hard to sleep. His days were filled with meetings with lawyers, investigators, and child protection agents. But what haunted him most wasn't just what almost happened. It was the fact that he had overlooked the one person who had saved everything. Clara had been right in front of him the whole time, and he had seen her as just part of the background. He hadn't even bothered to learn her full story before this all began. One afternoon, Richard found Clara in the garden, watering the plants near the fountain where Noah used to play. She was quiet, her face calm but tired. He walked toward her slowly and asked if he could speak with her. Clara nodded. Richard didn't start with small talk. He went straight to the point. He apologized, not just for what had happened, but for the way he had treated her before any of this started. He said he was ashamed that it had taken something so serious for him to see her clearly. "I saw you as part of the staff," he admitted, "not as someone who could think, observe, or protect." Clara listened silently, her hands still resting on the edge of the watering can. After a moment, she looked at him and said, "I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because a child needed help. I couldn't save my sister, but I could save him." It was the first time she had said those words directly to Richard. She told him how her sister had died years ago in a public hospital due to a medical error. No one had been punished. No one had cared. That pain had stayed with Clara for years. It had made her run from hospitals, uniforms, and anything that reminded her of that loss until now, until Noah. "When I saw him not waking up," she said, "I felt like I was back in that hospital. But this time, I had a chance to change something." Richard didn't interrupt her. He listened to every word. For the first time, he understood the weight she carried and why she acted so fast and so fiercely when Noah was in danger. Clara hadn't just saved his son. She had faced the one fear that had controlled her life for years. She had fought back, and she had won. Clara said she didn't want money or rewards. She only wanted peace. Richard promised her she would have it. He told her she would never have to worry about work or housing again, and that if she ever wanted to return to nursing or anything else, he would support her in every way possible. Clara nodded quietly, but inside she felt something shift. For years, she had avoided anything connected to her past. But now, that chapter felt like it had finally closed. She had done what she couldn't do back then. She had protected a life. And for the first time, she didn't feel powerless. Her pain had found meaning. Noah had survived. The truth had come out, and the people responsible would face justice. Clara didn't feel like a forgotten maid anymore. She had become someone who mattered, not because of her title, but because of her actions. And that was something no one could ever take from her again. In the days that followed, the mansion slowly returned to normal. The investigation continued, and the story made headlines across the country. But inside the house, things were different. Richard started spending more time with Noah. He also made changes to his company's policies, including new background check procedures and increased security for staff and their families. More importantly, he started treating everyone around him with more respect. He realized that real safety didn't come from money, walls, or cameras. It came from people who truly cared. People like Clara. She was no longer invisible in the mansion. The other staff members looked at her differently now. Some thanked her quietly, others simply treated her with new respect. Clara remained humble, but she accepted their kindness. She didn't need attention or praise. All she needed was the feeling that she had done the right thing. For the first time in a long time, she could breathe without guilt. Richard often watched his son playing again, laughing and full of energy. Every time he looked at Noah, he remembered how close he had come to losing him. And every time he passed Clara in the hallway or saw her walking in the garden, he felt grateful. He had once believed that his wealth could solve anything. But in the end, it wasn't the money that had saved his son. It was Clara, a woman with a hidden past, a quiet presence, and a heart that refused to let history repeat itself. Richard knew now that the most important people in life are not always the loudest, the richest, or the most visible. Sometimes they're the ones in the background, watching, listening, and ready to act when it truly matters. And for Clara, her story had finally come full circle. The past had returned, yes, but this time she had written the ending, and it was one she could finally live with. The nurse was officially arrested and taken into custody. The case quickly drew national attention. As the investigation moved forward, more information came to light. It turned out that Beatrice had used different identities in various countries. She had been involved in other suspicious deaths, all with the same pattern: children from wealthy families who died under unclear circumstances. Once the authorities confirmed her connection to a larger criminal organization, other states and even international agencies got involved. The group targeted rich heirs, mostly children, using subtle poisoning tactics to avoid suspicion. With the evidence from the Graves mansion, the entire operation began to collapse. Clara's testimony was essential. She provided detailed information about what she saw, what she did, and how she uncovered the truth. She was asked to speak in several hearings, and investigators credited her with breaking the case. Her quick thinking and knowledge had exposed something that had been hidden in plain sight for years. As Clara continued to testify and help with related cases, her name started to appear in the media. Newspapers and television channels shared her story, how a housekeeper had discovered a professional criminal operation and saved a billionaire's son. People across the country praised her. Medical professionals, hospital associations, and even former colleagues reached out to thank her for her bravery. She received official honors from a few organizations, including one for medical ethics and another for child protection. Hospitals offered her jobs. Some wanted her to return as a technician. Others wanted her to speak to their staff about recognizing medical abuse and reporting it. But Clara turned down all the offers. She told everyone the same thing. She wasn't looking for a career comeback. She had found peace in her current life. Her focus now was Noah. She didn't want to work in hospitals again. What she wanted was to protect the boy she had almost lost and make sure he never had to face danger again. Richard understood and respected her decision. He wanted to make sure Clara was never in a position where she felt small or invisible again. He promoted her to be the house manager. It was a role of leadership and responsibility. She wasn't just in charge of cleaning anymore. She now managed the entire staff, organized the household, and oversaw safety and daily operations. Richard also made sure she had full legal protection and financial stability. He put her name on a trust fund to ensure that no matter what happened in the future, Clara would be safe and respected. More importantly, he asked her to stay with the family, not as an employee, but as someone they loved and trusted. He told her she had become part of something greater than a job. She had become family. Clara was deeply moved. She had come to the mansion just to work, to disappear into silence. But now, everything had changed. The other staff members also began to change the way they looked at Clara. At first, she had been just the quiet woman who cleaned the floors and avoided conversations. Now, they saw her differently. They respected her not just because of what she had done, but because of the way she had done it, with calm, with courage, and without seeking anything in return. Some of the younger maids started coming to her for advice. The older ones began calling her by her first name, with admiration in their voices. Clara didn't let the attention get to her. She continued her work with the same discipline, but everyone could see the difference. She carried herself with quiet pride. She no longer looked like someone hiding from her past. Now, she looked like someone who had faced her pain and used it to do good. The same rubber gloves she once wore while scrubbing floors now felt like a symbol of strength and honor. Justice had been served, the people who planned to harm Noah and steal from the Graves family had been exposed and stopped. The house was safer now, not just because of security systems or bodyguards, but because everyone was more aware. Clara had changed the way people thought. She had proven that danger doesn't always look like danger, and that heroes don't always wear badges or suits. Sometimes heroes wear aprons and keep their heads down until the moment comes to stand up. The danger had been pushed away, and life inside the mansion slowly returned to a normal rhythm. Noah was healthy again. He smiled more, laughed often, and always wanted to be near Clara. Richard found comfort in seeing them together. It reminded him that money could build walls, but only real people could keep a home safe. Clara's presence was now a constant symbol of that truth. But Clara's story didn't end there. Even though the case was closed and the threats removed, her role in the world had quietly expanded. She kept in touch with some of the families from other cases. Some called her for advice. Others just wanted to thank her. She never looked for recognition. She wasn't interested in fame or reward, but she understood now that what happened to her sister had not been in vain. That old wound, which she had carried in silence for so long, had finally helped her protect another life. It had given her a reason to act, to speak up, and to trust herself again. Clara had found her voice. She had faced her past and rewritten her future, not as a victim, not as a forgotten worker, but as a protector. And while the chapter of danger had ended, something new was beginning. She didn't know where it would lead, but this time she wasn't afraid. On the day of Noah's next birthday, the atmosphere at the Graves mansion was calm and warm. It wasn't a massive celebration with decorations covering every inch of the property or crowds of people trying to impress each other. Richard had chosen to keep things simple and meaningful. Only a few close family members, trusted friends, and the staff who had stayed by his side through the recent chaos were invited. Everything had been carefully planned to make the day about Noah and the people who truly cared about him. There were balloons, small tables with snacks, and a big cake with his name on it. Noah, now stronger and happier, ran around the garden laughing and playing, his energy back to normal. He was excited about the games and the presents, but more than anything, he wanted to be close to one person who had become the most important part of his world, Clara. Clara didn't wear her usual work clothes that day. There was no apron, no gloves, no cleaning cart. She wore a simple, elegant dress, her hair neatly tied back. When she walked into the garden, some of the guests looked at her and smiled. They no longer saw her as the quiet housemaid. They saw her as someone who belonged, someone who had earned a place in that family. Noah spotted her as soon as she arrived and ran toward her with open arms. "Aunt Clara!" he shouted with excitement. She bent down and hugged him tightly. From that moment on, Noah didn't leave her side. He held her hand while showing his toys to the guests, pulled her toward the cake when it was time to sing, and insisted she sit next to him during the opening of presents. Clara couldn't hide the emotion in her eyes. Every time Noah looked at her with love, she felt something in her heart that she hadn't felt in years: peace. The other staff, now her teammates, and not just co-workers, treated her with respect and care. They asked if she needed anything, made sure she was comfortable, and included her in every part of the event. The family members who didn't know the full story were told by Richard what she had done. Some were shocked, others were deeply moved. More than once during the party, someone came up to Clara just to shake her hand and say thank you. She smiled politely each time, not looking for attention, but accepting their words with kindness. Clara never liked being the center of anything. But now she understood that being seen wasn't about fame, it was about being valued. And here, in this home that once felt distant and cold, she was finally being treated as more than just someone in the background. The difference wasn't in what she wore. It was in the way people looked at her now, with real appreciation. As the sun began to set and the last guests were preparing to leave, Richard walked toward Clara. He had spent most of the afternoon smiling, talking with relatives and helping Noah enjoy the day. But now his face was more serious. He had been waiting for the right moment. When he reached her, he didn't start with a speech. He just stood there for a second, looking at the woman who had saved his son's life. Then his eyes filled with tears. He put a hand on her shoulder and spoke in a quiet voice. "You saved my son," he said, pausing to breathe, "and I want you to know this is your home now too." Clara didn't respond right away. She looked at him, her eyes watering, but then turned to Noah, who was playing nearby, laughing loudly. That sound, that joy, was all she needed to hear. She smiled gently and nodded, her heart full. Clara didn't answer with a long speech. She didn't try to find the perfect words. Instead, she did what she always did. She listened, observed, and let her actions speak. Her eyes followed Noah as he chased a balloon across the grass. He looked free, safe, and full of life. Clara knew then that all the fear, the memories of her sister, the hard days and the quiet suffering had led her to this moment. She didn't need to be rich or powerful to make a difference. She had shown that real care, honest, deep care, was stronger than any title or job. The house, once a place of work and routine, now felt like a real home, not just for the child, not just for the father, but for her too. She hadn't planned on becoming family, but that's what had happened. And for the first time, she allowed herself to accept it completely. Noah came running back to her, holding a small toy in his hand. He told her he wanted her to be the first to see it. Clara took the toy and smiled. "It's perfect," she said. He smiled back, then sat beside her and leaned against her arm, already starting to get sleepy from the excitement of the day. Clara gently brushed his hair away from his forehead and kissed the top of his head. She looked up at the sky for a moment, then back at Richard, who was watching the scene with emotion in his eyes. They didn't need to say anything more. The message was clear. What saved that boy wasn't medicine, it wasn't security systems, and it wasn't money. It was someone who truly cared. Someone nobody had noticed before. Someone who had been in the shadows until the moment came when her heart and courage changed everything. And Clara finally felt whole. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.
Daughter of single father janitor answers a call and saves millionaire woman from fake contract. Before we start, I love seeing this community grow. Feel free to introduce yourself below. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the 42nd floor of Sterling Tower, casting harsh shadows across the marble floors that 6-year-old Emma Rodriguez had been quietly observing for the past 3 hours. While her father Marcus methodically cleaned the executive offices with his industrial vacuum, Emma sat cross-legged beside the massive mahogany desk, coloring in her Disney princess book with the concentration of a surgeon. Marcus had been the night janitor here for 3 years now, ever since the divorce left him struggling to make ends meet and fighting for custody of his precious daughter. Every Tuesday and Thursday night, when his ex-wife Jennifer worked her evening shifts at the hospital, Emma would tag along to the gleaming offices of Sterling Enterprises. She'd learned to be invisible, to stay quiet, and to never touch anything important. "Daddy, why does this office smell like expensive perfume even when nobody's here?" Emma asked, her crayon poised over Cinderella's gown. Marcus chuckled softly, emptying the pristine wastebasket. "That's because very important people work here, sweetheart. People who make big decisions and wear fancy clothes." The phone rang suddenly, its shrill tone cutting through the peaceful silence like a knife. Emma's head snapped up, her dark eyes wide with curiosity. The caller ID displayed Sterling Victoria Mobile in bold letters. "Don't touch that, Emma," Marcus warned gently, but he was across the room, tangled in the vacuum cord. The phone rang again, and again. Emma had been taught never to answer phones that weren't theirs, but something about the desperate persistence of the ringing made her stomach flutter with worry. What if someone needed help? What if it was an emergency? On the seventh ring, her small hand reached for the receiver. "Hello?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Oh, thank God, someone's there." The voice was breathless, panicked, unmistakably feminine. "This is Victoria Sterling. I need to speak with my assistant immediately. There's been a terrible mistake with the Morrison contract signing tonight." Emma's grip tightened on the phone. There's nobody here except me and my daddy. He's cleaning." "Cleaning? What time is it?" Victoria's voice cracked with desperation. "Listen, sweetie, I know this sounds crazy, but I need your help. Can you see any papers on the desk? Big, important-looking papers?" Emma's eyes scanned the immaculate desk surface. There, under a crystal paperweight, lay a thick document with "Morrison Acquisition Confidential" stamped across the top in red letters. "I see something that says Morrison," Emma said carefully. "Oh my God, yes. Listen to me very carefully. I'm stuck in traffic 20 miles away and I just got a call from my lawyer. The man I'm supposed to meet tonight isn't really from Morrison Industries. He's a con artist who's been planning to steal my company for months." Emma's heart began to pound. She'd watched enough movies with her daddy to know that bad people sometimes pretended to be good people to trick others. "What should I do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "There should be a number at the bottom of that paper. Can you read numbers?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm in first grade and I'm very good at reading." "Perfect. What's the number?" Emma carefully lifted the paperweight and read the digits slowly. 55500147. "That's it. That's the fake number he set up. The real Morrison Industries number ends in 0184. Sweetie, you just saved my entire life's work." Marcus finally freed himself from the vacuum cord and rushed over, his face pale with concern as he saw his daughter on the phone. "Emma, what are you doing?" She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "Daddy, I think I just helped stop bad people from stealing this lady's company." Marcus took the phone, his hands shaking. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry. My daughter shouldn't have answered your phone." "Sir?" Victoria's voice was thick with emotion. "Your daughter just prevented the biggest financial disaster of my life. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Please don't leave." Marcus stared at the phone in his calloused hand long after Victoria Sterling had hung up, his mind reeling with disbelief. In 3 years of cleaning these offices, he'd never imagined he'd be thrust into the middle of some corporate drama that sounded like it belonged in a Hollywood thriller. "Daddy, did I do something wrong?" Emma's voice was small, worried. She'd climbed down from the leather chair and was now tugging at his uniform pants with paint-stained fingers. "No, sweetheart. I think you might have done something very right." He knelt down to her eye level, brushing a strand of dark hair from her face. "But we need to be very careful now, okay? Important people are coming and we need to make sure you're safe." Emma nodded solemnly, her 6-year-old mind processing the gravity of the situation with surprising maturity. "The lady sounded scared, Daddy, like when I have nightmares and call for you." Marcus's heart clenched. Since the divorce 2 years ago, Emma had developed an acute sensitivity to people's emotions, especially fear and sadness. Jennifer always said it was because the child had witnessed too many arguments between her parents, but Marcus suspected it was something deeper, an intuitive gift that seemed to guide his daughter toward people who needed help. 28 minutes later, the elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and Victoria Sterling stepped into the office like a force of nature. She was nothing like Marcus had imagined. Instead of the cold, calculating businesswoman he'd envisioned, she was young, probably not much older than 30, with auburn hair disheveled from running and mascara slightly smudged around green eyes that sparkled with unshed tears. She wore a navy business suit that probably cost more than Marcus made in 2 months, but her designer heels were in her hand, revealing runs in her stockings from rushing through the building lobby. "Where is she?" Victoria's voice cracked with emotion as her eyes searched the room. Emma emerged from behind the desk where she'd been hiding, suddenly shy in the presence of this glamorous stranger who seemed to command the very air around her. Victoria dropped to her knees immediately, not caring about her expensive suit meeting the office floor. "You must be Emma." The little girl nodded, stepping closer with cautious curiosity. "Emma, do you understand what you did tonight?" "I helped stop bad people from taking your company," Emma replied matter-of-factly. Victoria's composure finally cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she reached out tentatively, as if asking permission before touching Emma's small hand. "You saved everything I've worked for since I was 18 years old. Everything my father built before he died. You saved 10,000 people's jobs. You saved my entire life." Marcus watched this exchange with growing amazement. This powerful woman, who probably commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar decisions daily, was crying in gratitude to his 6-year-old daughter. "How did you know it was a fake number?" Victoria asked, her voice steadying as she regained some composure. Emma tilted her head thoughtfully. "You sounded like my mommy did when she found out Daddy's friend Tommy was lying about borrowing money. Sometimes grown-ups' voices get shaky when other grown-ups are being mean to them." Victoria looked up at Marcus with wonder. "She has an incredible instinct for reading people." "She's always been like that," Marcus admitted. "Sometimes I think she understands people better than most adults do." Victoria stood slowly, her business demeanor returning as she processed the full scope of what had almost happened. The man who was supposed to meet me tonight had forged documents, fake credentials, everything. He's part of a sophisticated corporate espionage ring that targets family-owned businesses during vulnerable transitions. She pulled out her phone, dialing rapidly. "Detective Morrison? It's Victoria Sterling. We have a major development in the fraud case. Yes, they were planning to execute tonight. No, the signing never happened, thanks to an unexpected guardian angel." Emma giggled at being called a guardian angel, and Victoria smiled through her tears. "Marcus," Victoria said after ending the call, "I need to ask you something important." Victoria's question hung in the air like morning mist, heavy with unspoken possibilities that would change everything for Marcus and Emma Rodriguez. Marcus felt his pulse quicken as he watched this powerful woman gather herself, clearly preparing to say something that had been building in her mind during the past hour. "Marcus, in 34 years of living, 28 years of knowing my own mind, and 10 years of running this company, I've never met anyone, adult or child, who possessed the kind of intuitive intelligence your daughter showed tonight." Emma, who had been quietly reorganizing her crayons, looked up with bright, curious eyes. "What I'm about to propose might sound absolutely insane," Victoria continued, her voice gaining strength and conviction, "but I've built my entire business on trusting my instincts, and every instinct I have is screaming that this meeting tonight wasn't coincidence." Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he straightened Emma's coloring book, trying to appear calm while his mind raced through 1,000 possibilities. "What exactly are you suggesting, Ms. Sterling?" "I want to offer you a position, not just any position. I want you to become head of our facilities security division. Full benefits, salary of $85,000 annually, company housing assistance, and a college fund for Emma." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd been making $23,000 a year as a janitor, struggling every month to afford Emma's daycare, living in a cramped apartment where the heat sometimes didn't work, and the walls were thin enough that Emma could hear their elderly neighbor's television all night. "But more importantly," Victoria continued, her eyes never leaving Emma, "I want to establish a special program, a children's advisory initiative where kids like Emma, kids who see things adults miss, can help us identify problems in our business practices." Emma's head tilted with that characteristic expression of deep thought that Marcus knew so well. "You want me to help catch more bad people? I want you to help protect good people," Victoria corrected gently. "Sometimes the most important truths come from the most unexpected places." Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotions he couldn't quite name. Pride, fear, hope, and desperation all swirled together as he looked at his daughter's eager face. For 3 years he'd been grinding through minimum wage jobs, taking whatever work he could find to provide for Emma, while fighting Jennifer's constant insinuations that he wasn't capable of being a proper father. "Ms. Sterling, this is incredibly generous, but I need to understand. Why us? Why now?" Victoria moved to the massive window overlooking the city, her silhouette sharp against the glittering lights below. 6 months ago, I discovered that my CFO had been embezzling funds for 2 years. Last month, I found out my head of marketing was selling our product development secrets to competitors. 2 weeks ago, my own cousin tried to forge my signature on documents that would have transferred controlling interest in the company to a shell corporation. She turned back to face them, her expression vulnerable yet determined. "I've learned to trust financial reports, market analyses, and legal documents. But tonight, your 6-year-old daughter spotted a fraud that 3 different teams of adults missed. She read danger in a voice over the phone that trained security experts didn't catch." Emma had stopped coloring entirely now, sensing the weight of the adult conversation, even if she didn't understand all the implications. "There's something else," Victoria said quietly. "My father started this company when he was 25, the same age I was when he died and left me everything. He always told me that the most valuable employees weren't the ones with the most credentials, They were the ones who cared enough to do the right thing even when nobody was watching. Marcus felt tears burning behind his eyes. "Emma, what do you think? Do you want to help Ms. Sterling?" Emma looked between the two adults, her young mind working through concepts far beyond her years. "Will I still get to spend time with you, Daddy?" "Every single day," Marcus promised. "And will we help keep more families safe from bad people?" "That's exactly what we'd be doing," Victoria confirmed. Emma nodded with the solemn decisiveness that never failed to amaze her father. "Then yes, but I have one question." "What's that, sweetheart?" Victoria asked. "Can I bring my crayons to the new job?" Victoria laughed, and for the first time since Marcus had met her an hour ago, she looked truly, genuinely happy. "You can bring whatever makes you feel creative and confident." But even as they shook hands on this life-changing agreement, none of them noticed the figure watching from the stairwell, listening to every word with growing fury at seeing their carefully planned scheme unraveled by a child. 3 weeks had passed since that life-altering night, and Marcus still woke up some mornings convinced it had all been an elaborate dream. The modest but comfortable 2-bedroom apartment Victoria had helped them secure in a safe neighborhood felt like a palace compared to their previous cramped studio. Emma had her own room for the first time in her life, decorated with the princess theme she'd always wanted but they'd never been able to afford. "Daddy, look," Emma called from her new desk, where she was carefully reviewing what Victoria had explained were simplified business reports, essentially picture-based summaries of company activities designed to tap into Emma's remarkable intuitive abilities. Marcus paused his morning routine of preparing for his new role as head of facilities security, a title that still felt surreal every time he said it. "What did you find, sweetheart?" Emma pointed to a photograph of a smiling man in an expensive suit shaking hands with Victoria outside Sterling Tower. "This man makes my stomach feel funny. Like when I ate too much ice cream at Jenny Morrison's birthday party." Marcus looked more closely at the image. According to the caption, this was Richard Blackstone, a potential business partner interested in a joint venture with Sterling Enterprises. The meeting had been scheduled for next Tuesday. "What kind of funny feeling?" Marcus asked, having learned over the past 3 weeks to take Emma's instincts very seriously. "His smile doesn't match his eyes," Emma explained with the matter-of-fact tone she used when describing something obvious to her. "It's like when Mommy smiles at you during pickup, but her eyes are angry." Marcus felt a familiar chill run down his spine. Emma's ability to read micro-expressions and detect inconsistencies in people's behavior had proven uncannily accurate during her brief time as part of Victoria's advisory team. She'd already identified 2 employees who were padding their expense reports and flagged a vendor whose pricing seemed suspiciously inflated. Victoria had been amazed but not entirely surprised. Child psychologists have documented that kids Emma's age often pick up on deception better than adults because they haven't learned to rationalize away their gut instincts yet, she'd explained. Now, as Marcus looked at Richard Blackstone's photograph through Emma's eyes, he began to notice things he'd missed on first glance. The man's posture was slightly too rigid. His grip on Victoria's hand appeared stronger than necessary, and there was indeed something unsettling about the disconnect between his broad smile and his calculating gaze. "We should tell Victoria," Marcus decided, reaching for his phone. But before he could dial, their apartment buzzer rang with unusual urgency. 3 short bursts, then a pause, then 3 more. It was the signal Victoria had established for emergency communications. Marcus hurried to the intercom. "Victoria, what's wrong? Can I come up? We have a problem." Minutes later, Victoria burst through their door, her usually pristine appearance disheveled and her green eyes wide with concern. She was carrying a manila envelope thick with documents. "Emma was right to be suspicious," she said without preamble. "My security team finished running background checks on Richard Blackstone an hour ago." Emma looked up from her coloring, immediately sensing the tension in the room. "He's one of the bad people, isn't he?" Victoria knelt beside Emma's chair. "Unfortunately, yes. It turns out Richard Blackstone is part of the same criminal network that tried to steal my company 3 weeks ago. They've regrouped and are trying a different approach." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "What kind of approach?" Victoria spread several documents across Emma's desk. "Instead of forged contracts, they're using a more sophisticated con. Blackstone is presenting himself as a legitimate businessman interested in a partnership, but the real plan is to gain access to our internal systems, steal our client database, and sell it to our competitors." Emma studied the papers with surprising focus for a 6-year-old, her finger tracing over financial charts she couldn't possibly understand but somehow seemed to be analyzing instinctively. "There's more," Victoria continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. My head of security discovered that they've been watching us. All of us. They know about Emma's role in stopping their first scheme, and they're not happy about it. Marcus felt a surge of protective fury mixed with cold fear. Are you saying my daughter is in danger because she helped you? I'm saying we're all in danger until we stop them permanently, Victoria replied grimly. But I also think Emma might be the key to doing exactly that. Emma looked up from the documents with that eerily mature expression she sometimes wore. They don't know I can tell when grown-ups are lying just by looking at pictures, do they? Victoria smiled, despite the gravity of the situation. No, sweetheart, they don't. And that might be our biggest advantage. What are you proposing? Marcus asked, though part of him already suspected and dreaded the answer. The meeting with Blackstone is in 4 days. If we handle this right, we can not only protect the company, but gather enough evidence to shut down their entire operation. Victoria's eyes met Marcus's with steady determination. But it means putting Emma in a room with very dangerous people. Emma didn't hesitate. If it helps catch all the bad people so they can't hurt other families, then I want to do it. Marcus looked at his 6-year-old daughter, brave, intuitive, and determined to protect others, and felt his heart swell with pride and terror in equal measure. Outside their window, a black sedan that had been parked across the street for the past hour finally pulled away, its occupants having heard everything they needed through sophisticated listening devices. The trap was being set, but none of them were entirely sure who would be the hunter and who would be the prey. The next morning brought unexpected visitors and revelations that would shake the foundation of everything Marcus thought he understood about their situation. He was making Emma's breakfast when 3 sharp knocks echoed through their apartment, not the gentle tap of friends or the urgent buzzer of Victoria, but the authoritative sound of people who expected to be let in immediately. Marcus peered through the peephole and felt his blood run cold. 2 FBI agents stood in the hallway, their badges clearly visible, their expressions serious and professional. Emma, go to your room and close the door, Marcus instructed quietly, trying to keep the fear out of his voice. Daddy, are those the good police or the bad police? Emma asked with the perceptive directness that never ceased to amaze him. They're good police, sweetheart, but grown-ups need to talk about grown-up things. Emma nodded and disappeared into her room, but Marcus knew she'd probably press her ear to the door. She'd developed a habit of monitoring adult conversations ever since the divorce, a survival mechanism that helped her navigate the unpredictable emotional landscape of her parents' relationship. Marcus opened the door to find Special Agent Sarah Chen and Special Agent Michael Torres, both appearing to be in their late 30s, both wearing the kind of serious expressions that suggested this wasn't a social call. Mr. Rodriguez, I'm Agent Chen, this is Agent Torres. We need to speak with you about Victoria Sterling and some recent events involving your daughter. Marcus's hands began to tremble slightly as he gestured them into the modest living room. Is Victoria in some kind of trouble? Agent Torres consulted a small notebook. Mr. Rodriguez, are you aware that Sterling Enterprises has been under federal investigation for the past 6 months? The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Investigation for what? Money laundering, tax evasion, and suspected connections to several international fraud schemes, Agent Chen explained, her voice professionally neutral, but not unkind. The Richard Blackstone situation you've become involved in is part of a much larger operation we've been tracking. Marcus sank into his second-hand sofa, his mind reeling. But Victoria said Blackstone was trying to steal from her company. She said she was the victim. That's what makes this case so complex, Agent Torres replied, settling into the chair across from Marcus. Our investigation suggests that Victoria Sterling may be playing both sides, presenting herself as a target while actually coordinating with the very criminals she claims to be fighting against. From Emma's room came the soft sound of crayons being set down too forcefully. She was definitely listening. That's impossible, Marcus protested, though even as he spoke, doubts began creeping into his mind. Emma saved her from a fraudulent contract. Victoria offered us jobs, helped us get this apartment, gave Emma opportunities. Agent Chen leaned forward. Mr. Rodriguez, what if I told you that the phone call your daughter answered 3 weeks ago might not have been the coincidence it appeared to be? Marcus felt the room begin to spin slightly. What do you mean? We believe Victoria Sterling orchestrated that entire encounter. The fraudulent contract your daughter helped expose was likely a setup designed to establish trust and bring you closer to the operation. The sound of Emma's bedroom door opening made all 3 adults turn. She appeared in the doorway, her small face pale but determined. Daddy, can I tell them something important? Marcus looked helplessly between his daughter and the federal agents. Emma, we talked about staying in your room, but Daddy, they're wrong about the nice lady. Agent Chen exchanged a glance with her partner, then addressed Emma directly. What makes you think we're wrong, sweetheart? Emma walked closer, clutching her favorite purple crayon like a talisman. Because I can tell when grown-ups are lying, and the nice lady never lies to me. But you're not lying either. You believe what you're saying is true. Agent Torres raised an eyebrow. That's a pretty sophisticated observation for someone your age. My daddy says I'm good at understanding people's feelings, Emma replied matter-of-factly. The nice lady feels scared and worried, but not guilty scared like people feel when they do bad things. She feels protective scared, like my daddy when he thinks I might get hurt. Marcus watched his daughter analyze the situation with growing amazement and terror. She was displaying the same intuitive gifts that had made her so valuable to Victoria, but now those gifts were being applied to a federal investigation. Agent Chen pulled out a tablet and showed Emma a series of photographs, surveillance images of Victoria meeting with various individuals over the past several months. Can you tell us what you see in these pictures, Emma? Emma studied each image carefully, her young face serious with concentration. After several minutes, she looked up with troubled eyes. Some of these people make her feel scared, but she's trying to hide it. And this one. She pointed to a photograph of Victoria shaking hands with a man in an expensive overcoat. This man makes her feel sick, like when I have to take medicine that tastes bad, but I know I need to take it anyway. Agent Torres made notes rapidly. What about this one? He showed her the original photograph of Richard Blackstone. Emma's reaction was immediate and visceral. She stepped backward, her small body tense with alarm. He's very dangerous, not just mean. Dangerous like fire or deep water, and he's angry at me specifically. The room fell silent as the implications of Emma's observations sank in. Agents, Marcus said quietly. If Victoria really is involved in criminal activity, and if dangerous people know my daughter helped stop their scheme, then Emma is in immediate danger regardless of whether Victoria is friend or enemy. Agent Chen nodded grimly. Which is why we're here, Mr. Rodriguez. We want to offer you and Emma protective custody while we sort this out. Emma looked between the adults with growing distress. But what about the nice lady? If bad people are trying to hurt her too, who's going to help her? It was a question none of the adults could answer, and as Marcus looked at his 6-year-old daughter's concerned face, he realized they were all walking into a trap that was far more complex and dangerous than any of them had imagined. The safe house was nothing like what Marcus had expected from television shows. Instead of a stark institutional building, the FBI had brought them to a comfortable suburban home in Alexandria, Virginia, complete with a backyard swing set and neighbors who waved from their front porches. Agent Chen explained that the best hiding places were often the most ordinary ones. Emma had been quiet during the 2-hour drive, clutching her coloring book and stealing worried glances at her father. Now, as Agent Torres showed them around the house, she finally voiced the question that had been building in her young mind. Agent Chen, if we're hiding from bad people, does that mean the nice lady is hiding too? Agent Chen knelt to Emma's level, her professional demeanor softening slightly. Emma, we're not entirely sure where Ms. Sterling is right now. That's part of what we're trying to figure out. What Agent Chen didn't say, what she couldn't say to a 6-year-old, was that Victoria Sterling had vanished completely 12 hours ago. Her apartment was empty, her office cleared out, and her personal accounts had been closed. Either she was running from danger, or she was running from justice. Marcus unpacked their hastily gathered belongings while Emma explored her temporary bedroom, which had been decorated with thoughtful touches, children's books on the nightstand, crayons and paper on the small desk, and even a stuffed animal that looked remarkably similar to the teddy bear she'd had to leave behind in their rushed departure. Daddy, Emma called from the window. There's a lady across the street who keeps looking at our house. Marcus joined her at the window, his heart rate immediately accelerating. A woman in dark sunglasses was indeed watching their house from beside a parked SUV, making no attempt to appear casual about her surveillance. Agent Chen, Marcus called urgently. But when Agent Chen arrived at the window, the woman and the SUV were gone. Could have been a neighbor, Agent Torres suggested, though his hand had instinctively moved to his weapon. We'll do a perimeter check. As the agent stepped outside, Emma tugged on her father's shirt. Daddy, that wasn't a neighbor. How do you know, sweetheart? Because neighbors don't stand like soldiers and they don't have angry eyes even when they're far away. Marcus felt the familiar chill that came with recognizing Emma's uncanny accuracy. What else did you notice about her? Emma was quiet for a moment, processing observations with the intensity she usually reserved for her most complex coloring projects. She was looking at our house the way the bad man in the picture looked at the nice lady, like she was planning something. Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Your daughter cost us $50 million. The debt will be paid." Marcus's hand shook as he showed the message to Agent Chen, who had just returned from checking the perimeter. "We're moving you," Agent Chen decided immediately. "Pack only what Emma needs. We leave in 10 minutes. But as Marcus hurried to gather Emma's things, she remained at the window, her small face pressed against the glass with an expression of intense concentration. "Emma, we need to go." "Daddy, wait." Her voice carried an urgency he'd learned never to ignore. "The nice lady is coming." Marcus rushed to the window and saw nothing but empty street and afternoon shadows. "Emma, there's nobody there." "She's not here yet," Emma explained patiently, "but she's coming to help us. I can feel it." Agent Torres appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Rodriguez, we have multiple vehicles approaching the perimeter. We need to move now." As if summoned by Emma's prediction, Victoria Sterling's silver Mercedes appeared at the end of the street, driving fast but not recklessly. Behind her, at least 3 black SUVs were in obvious pursuit. "My God," Agent Chen breathed, speaking rapidly into her radio. "All units, we have civilians in immediate danger. Request backup at safe house location." Victoria's car screeched to a halt in front of the house and she leaped out, her business attire replaced by jeans and a bulletproof vest, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Emma! Marcus!" she shouted toward the house. "You have about 30 seconds before this street becomes a war zone." Emma looked up at her father with absolute certainty in her dark eyes. "See, Daddy? I told you she was one of the good people." Marcus scooped Emma into his arms and ran toward the door, Agent Chen flanking them with her weapon drawn. Whatever was happening, whatever danger they were all running from, his 6-year-old daughter had somehow seen it coming. As they reached Victoria's car, the first gunshots rang out from the pursuing vehicles. Emma buried her face against her father's shoulder and whispered, "The bad people are really angry now." Victoria gunned the engine, and they sped away from the safe house that had lasted less than 4 hours, racing toward a confrontation that would determine whether Emma's gift for reading people would save them all, or make them targets for the rest of their lives. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Alexandria felt like something from Emma's worst nightmares, but Victoria assured them it was the safest place they could be, while Agent Chen coordinated with her FBI team. Emma sat cross-legged on a blanket Victoria had produced from her emergency kit, her coloring book open but her crayons untouched as she listened to the adults planning their next move. "Victoria, I need the truth," Marcus demanded, his voice tight with exhaustion and fear. "The FBI thinks you're part of this criminal network. Emma insists you're innocent, and my daughter has been right about everything so far." Victoria paced the concrete floor, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. "The truth is complicated, Marcus. Yes, I've been working with federal agents for the past 8 months, but not as a suspect, as an undercover asset." Agent Chen looked up from her tactical communication device. "Ms. Sterling is what we call a cooperating witness. Her father's company was infiltrated by this criminal organization 5 years ago, shortly before his death." Emma's head snapped up with sudden understanding. "Your daddy died because of the bad people, didn't he?" Victoria's composure cracked slightly. "My father discovered that several of his most trusted employees were using Sterling Enterprises to launder money for an international crime syndicate. When he tried to expose them, he died in what everyone believed was a car accident." "But you knew it wasn't an accident," Emma said softly, displaying the emotional intelligence that never failed to amaze the adults around her. "I knew, but I couldn't prove it. So I spent 3 years pretending to be the naive young heiress while secretly gathering evidence. The FBI approached me 8 months ago when their investigation finally connected to mine." Marcus felt pieces of a massive puzzle clicking into place. "So the night Emma answered your phone was completely genuine," Victoria confirmed. "Richard Blackstone and his people had been planning that fraud for months. They just didn't know I was already working with federal agents to bring them down." Agent Chen's radio crackled with urgent communications. "All units, we have movement on the south perimeter. Multiple vehicles approaching the warehouse district." Emma stood up abruptly, her small body tense with alarm. "They found us." "How is that possible?" Marcus asked, though he was already lifting Emma into his arms. Victoria's face went pale as realization dawned. "The text message they sent to your phone. They're tracking us through your cell signal." Agent Chen was already moving toward the warehouse exit. Everyone out now. We have maybe 2 minutes before they surround the building. But as they reached the door, Emma grabbed Victoria's arm with surprising strength. Wait, something's wrong. Emma, we don't have time, Marcus started. No, Daddy, something's really wrong. Emma's dark eyes were wide with the kind of fear he'd only seen once before, during the worst night of his divorce proceedings when Jennifer had threatened to take Emma away permanently. The bad people aren't just chasing us. They're hurting us. Victoria froze. What do you mean, sweetheart? Emma pointed toward the 3 exits Agent Chen had been surveying. They want us to run toward the back door. That's where the really bad things are waiting. Agent Chen spoke rapidly into her radio, then turned to the group with grim confirmation. Thermal imaging shows heat signatures positioned at all exits except the main entrance. The child is right. They're trying to funnel us into a trap. So what do we do? Marcus asked, holding Emma tighter. Emma wiggled down from her father's arms and walked purposefully toward a pile of shipping containers stacked near the east wall. We go up. Victoria followed Emma's gaze and saw what the 6-year-old had spotted. A series of containers arranged like steps, leading to a skylight that appeared to be accessible from the roof of the highest container. That's incredibly dangerous, Agent Chen protested. More dangerous than walking into an ambush? Emma asked with devastating logic. Victoria was already testing the stability of the first container. She's right, and they won't expect us to go up because most adults wouldn't consider it. As the sound of vehicles grew closer, Marcus made the hardest decision of his life. Okay, Emma, you lead the way. What followed was the most terrifying 10 minutes of Marcus's existence. Watching his 6-year-old daughter climb makeshift steps made of shipping containers, with gunshots beginning to echo from the warehouse entrances below. But Emma moved with the fearless confidence of childhood, and when they finally crawled through the skylight onto the warehouse roof, Marcus realized his daughter hadn't just saved their lives again. She'd proven that sometimes the most unconventional thinking comes from the purest hearts. Now what? Now, Victoria whispered as they crouched on the roof, watching black-clad figures storm the empty warehouse below. Emma pointed toward the neighboring building, where a maintenance ladder led down to what appeared to be a delivery truck parked in shadows. Now we become invisible, Emma said simply, already moving toward their next escape route. Marcus followed his daughter across rooftops in the growing darkness, marveling at how a 6-year-old had become their best strategist in a battle against international criminals. The delivery truck belonged to Martinez Brothers Construction, and the keys were exactly where Emma had somehow intuited they would be, tucked inside the front wheel well. As Victoria started the engine, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that his daughter's lucky guesses were becoming too frequent and too accurate to be mere chance. Emma, how did you know about the keys? He asked as they drove through back roads away from the warehouse district. Emma was busy coloring again, her crayon movements precise and methodical. The man who drives this truck has the same worry lines around his eyes that you used to have before we got the new apartment. People who worry about losing their jobs hide backup keys in case they lock themselves out. Agent Chen, who was monitoring police communications from the passenger seat, looked back at Emma with growing amazement. You deduced all that from looking at a parked truck? And there was a family picture taped to the dashboard, Emma added matter-of-factly. People with families always plan for emergencies. Victoria navigated toward what she explained was a secondary safe location, a small farm owned by Agent Chen's retired partner, 40 minutes outside the city. But as they drove, Marcus noticed Emma becoming increasingly agitated, her coloring becoming more frantic and less precise. What's wrong, sweetheart? Emma looked up with troubled eyes. The really bad person isn't with the other bad people who were chasing us. What do you mean? Victoria asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. All those people at the warehouse were scared angry, like when kids at school are mean because someone bigger is being mean to them first. But the person who makes all the decisions, the one who hurt your daddy, they're somewhere else, planning something worse. Agent Chen's radio suddenly erupted with frantic communications. All units, we have a situation at Sterling Tower. Hostage situation in progress. Multiple civilians trapped on the 42nd floor. Victoria slammed on the brakes, her face draining of color. That's my executive floor. My entire senior staff works late on Thursdays. It's a trap, Agent Chen said immediately. They're using your employees as bait to draw you out. But Emma was already shaking her head. It's not just a trap for the nice lady. It's a trap for me. The adults exchanged alarmed glances. What do you mean, Emma? Marcus asked gently. The really bad person knows I can tell when people are lying. They think if they hurt innocent people, I'll have to come help, and then they can catch me. Victoria's hands gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. They're using children's natural empathy as a weapon. More than that, Agent Chen realized with growing horror. They're banking on the fact that Emma's gift is so valuable. She'll feel responsible for saving people even when it puts her in danger. Emma set down her crayon and looked at each adult with the solemn expression that Marcus had learned. Meant she was about to say something profound. But they made a mistake. What kind of mistake? Victoria asked. They think I'll come because I feel sorry for the scared people. But that's not why I'll come. Marcus felt his heart rate spike. Emma, we are not going anywhere near that building. Yes, we are, Daddy. Because the really bad person made their biggest mistake of all. Which is? Agent Chen prompted, though her expression suggested she was dreading the answer. Emma's voice carried a steely determination that seemed impossible in someone so young. They hurt the nice lady's daddy, and now they're trying to hurt her family at work. Nobody should have to be scared at work like my daddy used to be. Victoria pulled the truck over to the side of the road, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her professional composure. Emma, you don't understand how dangerous this person is. They've killed before. They won't hesitate to hurt a child. I know, Emma replied simply, but they don't understand how dangerous I am. The statement sent chills through all three adults. Not because Emma sounded threatening. She still looked like any other 6-year-old with her princess coloring book and purple crayon clutched in her small hand. But because her quiet confidence suggested she understood something about this situation that the adults were missing. What aren't you telling us, Emma? Marcus asked softly. Emma looked directly at her father, and for a moment Marcus saw something in his daughter's eyes that seemed far older than her 6 years. I know who the really bad person is, Daddy. I've known since the first night when I answered the phone. How is that possible? Victoria whispered. Because, Emma said, returning to her coloring with devastating calm, they've been watching us for a lot longer than 3 weeks, and they made the mistake of letting me see them before they knew what I could see in return. Agent Chen's radio crackled with updates from Sterling Tower, where the hostage situation was escalating rapidly, but Marcus could only stare at his daughter, realizing that everything they thought they knew about their situation was about to change again. The revelation came as Emma carefully selected a red crayon and began coloring what appeared to be a simple drawing of their old apartment building. But as Marcus watched, he realized she wasn't just drawing from memory. She was documenting surveillance that she'd observed, but never mentioned. Emma, show us what you mean, Victoria said gently, pulling the truck into an abandoned gas station where they could talk without being overheard. Emma turned her coloring book toward the adults, revealing a detailed sketch that was far more sophisticated than typical 6-year-old artwork. The drawing showed their former apartment building with a dark sedan parked across the street, a woman with long black hair sitting inside, and even the distinctive antenna configuration of surveillance equipment. She was there every Tuesday and Thursday when we went to work with you, Emma explained to Victoria. At first I thought she was just waiting for someone, but then I noticed she wrote things down every time we left the building. Agent Chen studied the drawing with professional interest. Emma, how long had you been seeing this woman? Emma's brow furrowed with concentration. Since right after Christmas, but she wasn't trying to be hidden then. She wanted me to see her. Marcus felt ice forming in his stomach. Wanted you to see her? Why? Because she was testing if I would notice things that grown-ups miss. Like a test at school, but sneaky. Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. Emma, did this woman ever try to talk to you? Not exactly. But one time when Daddy was getting groceries, she got out of her car and pretended to tie her shoe near our building. She was really trying to see if I would tell Daddy about her. Did you? Agent Chen asked. Emma shook her head solemnly. I knew it would make Daddy worry, and he was already worried about lots of things. But I watched her back to see what she would do. And what did she do? Emma selected a black crayon and added details to her drawing. Details that made all three adults lean closer with growing alarm. She made a phone call, and then she smiled. But it wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile people make when they think they're smarter than everyone else. Victoria's hand trembled as she pointed to a figure Emma had drawn near the surveillance car. Emma, was there ever anyone else with this woman? Sometimes a man in expensive clothes came to talk to her. He never got out of his own car, just pulled up next to hers. Emma began a new drawing, this one showing 2 vehicles and stick figures that somehow managed to convey distinct personalities despite their simplicity. Agent Chen's radio buzzed with an urgent update. Command, we have confirmation that the hostage situation is a setup. The hostages appear to be actors, and the real Sterling employees were evacuated hours ago. So it really is a trap specifically for us, Victoria concluded. But Emma was shaking her head again. Not just for us. For you specifically, nice lady. The woman in the car, she's angry at you for something that happened a long time ago. Emma, I've never seen this woman before in my life. Emma's expression grew sad as she added final details to her latest drawing. She used to work for your daddy. Before he died. The silence in the truck was deafening. Victoria's face had gone completely white, and Agent Chen was frantically checking files on her tablet. That's impossible, Victoria whispered. Everyone who worked for my father was thoroughly investigated after his death. What was her name, Emma? Agent Chen asked urgently. Emma looked confused for a moment. I don't know her name, but I know she used to make your daddy feel the same kind of sad worried that she makes you feel now. Victoria's hands began to shake as memories began flooding back. There was a woman, Rebecca Morrison. She was my father's assistant for 7 years. She was questioned after his death but cleared of any involvement. Agent Chen was typing rapidly. Rebecca Morrison, age 34, former executive assistant to James Sterling. Disappeared 6 months after Sterling's death. Current whereabouts unknown. But why would she wait 5 years to come after me? Victoria asked. Emma looked up from her coloring with the matter-of-fact expression she used when explaining obvious things to confused adults. Because she wasn't ready before. She needed to learn how to hurt people the way your daddy accidentally hurt her. My father never hurt anyone intentionally, Victoria protested. Not hurt, Emma clarified patiently. Heart hurt. The way my mommy felt heart hurt when she found out daddy's friend Tommy was more important to him than she was. Marcus felt the pieces clicking together with sickening clarity. Emma, are you saying this Rebecca person was in love with Victoria's father? Emma nodded solemnly. And when he died, she blamed the nice lady for not protecting him. But really, she's most angry at herself for not being brave enough to tell him how she felt before the bad things happened. Victoria slumped against the driver's seat as understanding dawned. She's not just trying to steal my company. She's trying to destroy everything my father built because she thinks I don't deserve to have what she lost. Emma's final drawing was the most detailed yet. A woman standing alone outside Sterling Tower, holding what appeared to be a detonator. That's why the hostage thing is fake, Emma said quietly. She doesn't want to hurt innocent people. She just wants to hurt you the way she's been hurting since your daddy died. Agent Chen was already calling for backup and bomb disposal units, but Emma wasn't finished. There's one more thing, she said, her voice carrying a weight that seemed impossible for a 6-year-old. She's not planning to live through tonight. She thinks if she can't have your daddy, then you shouldn't get to have his love either. The Sterling Tower evacuation was proceeding smoothly when Rebecca Morrison made her first and only mistake. She underestimated a 6-year-old's capacity for strategic thinking. While FBI negotiators kept her occupied through building communications, Emma had been quietly studying the architectural plans Agent Chen had pulled up on her tablet. She's not in the building, Emma announced suddenly, causing all the adults to stop their frantic planning. What do you mean? Victoria asked. The thermal imaging shows heat signatures on the 42nd floor. Emma shook her head with patient certainty. Those are fake heat things. She's somewhere she can see the whole building but stay safe when the explodey things happen. Agent Chen checked her tactical displays. All surveillance shows the subject contained within the building perimeter. She's not lying, Marcus said firmly, having learned to trust his daughter's instincts completely. Emma, where do you think she is? Emma pointed to the construction crane visible in the background of the news footage streaming on Agent Chen's device. Up there, where your daddy used to take you to see the whole city, Victoria gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The Meridian Building construction site. My father took me there when I was 8 years old, right before they finished it. He said someday I'd build something even taller. Rebecca would have known about that memory, Agent Chen realized. As his assistant, she would have been privy to personal conversations. But Emma was already grabbing her coloring supplies, moving with the purposeful determination that had become familiar to the adults over the past month. We need to go talk to her. Absolutely not, Marcus said immediately. Emma, this woman is planning to blow up a building. She's dangerous. She's not dangerous to me, Emma replied with calm certainty. She's dangerous to the nice lady because she thinks the nice lady stole her happiness. But she's not angry at little kids. Victoria knelt beside Emma, her voice gentle but firm. Sweetheart, even if you're right, we can't risk putting you in danger. Emma looked up with eyes that seemed far too mature for her small face. But don't you see I'm the only one who can help her stop being so sad? What do you mean? Agent Chen asked, though she was already dreading the answer. Emma selected her purple crayon, her favorite, and began drawing with swift, confident strokes. Grown-ups who are sad for a long time sometimes forget that other people can be sad too. She thinks she's the only person who misses your daddy. The drawing that emerged showed two stick figures standing together, one tall, one small, both with tears drawn carefully beneath their eyes. She doesn't know that you miss him too, Emma continued, addressing Victoria directly. She thinks you only care about the company and the money, not about loving your daddy. Victoria's composure finally cracked completely. But I was only 10 when he died. I barely understood what was happening. I spent years feeling guilty that I couldn't save him. I know, Emma said softly. That's why you need to tell her. But she won't listen to grown-up words from you. She's too angry. Agent Chen was monitoring multiple communication channels, her expression growing more urgent by the minute. Whatever we're going to do, we need to decide quickly. She's given us a 30-minute deadline before she triggers the explosives. Emma stood up, clutching her coloring book with determination. I need to show her something. Emma, no, Marcus said. But his daughter was already moving toward the door. Daddy, remember when I was really mad at you after the divorce because I thought you didn't love Mommy anymore, and you showed me the pictures of when you were happy together? Marcus felt his heart clench at the memory. Yes, sweetheart. That lady needs to see pictures too. Pictures that show the nice lady loved her daddy just as much as she did, but in a different way. Victoria's eyes widened with sudden understanding. The photo albums. My father kept photo albums in his office safe. Pictures of me growing up, father-daughter moments, things Rebecca might not have seen. More than that, Emma added, her voice carrying the wisdom that never failed to amaze the adults around her. She needs to see that you became the kind of person your daddy would be proud of, that you didn't waste his love. Agent Chen made the decision that would either save lives or end them all. We're going up that crane, but Emma stays in the vehicle until we assess the situation. Emma nodded agreement, but Marcus could see the determined glint in her eyes that meant she was already planning something the adults wouldn't approve of. As they drove toward the Meridian building, Emma quietly tore a page from her coloring book, a drawing she'd been working on for weeks without showing anyone. It was a picture of a man in a business suit standing next to a small girl, both of them smiling with carefully written words at the bottom. Sometimes people we love have to go away, but the love stays forever. It was a picture of herself and her daddy, but Marcus realized it could represent any father and child who had been separated too soon. Emma folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into her pocket, preparing for the most important conversation of her young life. The construction crane towered 30 stories above the city, its skeletal frame silhouetted against storm clouds that had been gathering throughout the evening. Rebecca Morrison stood on the operator's platform, 400 feet above ground, with clear sightlines to Sterling Tower and a dead man's switch clutched in her right hand. Agent Chen's team had established a perimeter at the base of the crane, but everyone knew that any attempt to climb up would result in immediate detonation of the explosives Rebecca had placed throughout Sterling Tower. She's got thermal sensors rigged to the crane access ladder, Agent Chen reported grimly. The moment anyone starts climbing, she'll know. Victoria paced frantically in the command vehicle, clutching the photo albums she'd retrieved from her father's office safe. There has to be another way up there. Emma, who had been unusually quiet during the 15-minute drive, suddenly spoke up from the back seat. There is. All the adults turned to look at her. The window washers use a different ladder on the outside of the building next door. It goes almost as high as the crane. Agent Chen checked her architectural plans. She's right. The Meridian building has external maintenance access that would put us within 50 feet of the crane platform. That's still too far, Marcus protested, and there's no way to cross that gap safely. Emma was studying the crane through the vehicle's window with intense concentration. We don't need to cross the gap. We just need to be close enough for her to hear us. Emma, your voice won't carry that far in this wind, Victoria said gently. Not my voice, Emma replied, pointing to the megaphone attached to Agent Chen's tactical gear. And not just words. She held up her coloring book, flipped to a page she'd been working on during the drive. It was a detailed drawing of Sterling Tower with tiny stick figures visible in the windows, figures representing all the employees who had been safely evacuated. She thinks she's saving people by stopping the bad company, but she needs to see that the company isn't bad anymore, that it's full of good people who have families and kids and dreams. Agent Chen made the tactical decision that would either end the standoff or escalate it beyond control. Morrison, this is Agent Chen. We're sending someone up to talk with you. No weapons, no tricks, just conversation. Rebecca's voice crackled over the radio they'd managed to establish. Send Sterling, alone. Anyone else approaches and I trigger the charges. I can't let Victoria go up there alone, Marcus said immediately. But Emma was already unbuckling her seatbelt. She won't be alone. Emma, absolutely not, Victoria protested. You said she's not dangerous to little kids, Emma reminded her. And you need me because I can tell if she's lying about being willing to listen. Agent Chen looked between Marcus and his daughter, recognizing the same stubborn determination in both their faces. If we do this, Emma stays back from the platform edge, and we maintain constant radio contact. The climb up the Meridian building's external maintenance ladder was the most terrifying experience of Victoria's life, made worse by the knowledge that a 6-year-old was climbing behind her, carrying a coloring book and a purple crayon as if they were going to a routine meeting. When they reached the platform level with the crane, Victoria could see Rebecca clearly for the first time in 5 years. Her father's former assistant looked exhausted, hollow-eyed and desperate, but not unhinged. She was a woman who had planned every detail meticulously and was prepared to follow through. Rebecca, Victoria called across the 50-foot gap. I brought something to show you. Rebecca's laugh was bitter. What could you possibly show me that would matter now? Victoria held up the first photo album. Pictures my father kept of me growing up. Pictures that show how much he loved me and how much I loved him. I don't care about your privileged childhood, Rebecca shouted back. That's when Emma stepped forward, her small voice somehow carrying clearly in the wind. But you do care that she misses her daddy just like you miss him. Rebecca's expression changed immediately upon seeing Emma. What is a child doing up here? I'm here because grown-ups sometimes forget that being sad doesn't mean you have to make other people sad too. Emma called back with the fearless honesty that had become her trademark. Emma held up her coloring book, open to the drawing she'd made during the drive. See all these people in the building? They all have people who love them, just like you loved Mr. Sterling. For the first time since the standoff began, Rebecca's hand holding the dead man's switch began to tremble. You don't understand, Rebecca called back, her voice breaking. He was everything to me, and she got to have his love every day while I watched from the outside. Emma's response would determine whether the night ended in tragedy or healing. But love isn't like pizza, where if someone else gets a piece, there's less for you. Love grows bigger when you share it. The silence that followed was broken only by the wind whistling through the crane's metal framework. Emma's words hung in the air between the crane and the building, carried by a wind that seemed to pause, waiting for Rebecca Morrison's response. For 30 seconds that felt like hours. The only sounds were the distant hum of the city below and the soft creaking of metal under stress. Then Rebecca's voice, much quieter now, drifted across the gap. How does a 6-year-old know about love and loss? Emma clutched her purple crayon tighter, drawing strength from its familiar weight. Because my mommy and daddy used to love each other, and then they stopped. But they both still love me. So I learned that love can change shape, but it doesn't have to disappear. Victoria seized the moment, her voice steady despite her fear. Rebecca, my father talked about you all the time. He said you were the most dedicated person he'd ever worked with. He trusted you with everything. Trust isn't love, Rebecca replied, but her voice lacked the venom it had carried moments before. Emma stepped closer to the platform edge, ignoring Agent Chen's frantic radio warnings. Mr. Sterling did love you, just not the same way he loved his little girl. But that doesn't mean it wasn't real love. How could you possibly know that? Rebecca asked, and for the first time she sounded more curious than angry. Emma opened her coloring book to a drawing she'd made weeks ago without understanding its significance. A picture of a man in a business suit standing between two figures. A small girl holding his hand and a woman standing slightly apart but clearly important to him. Because, Emma called across the gap, the nice lady told me her daddy always said that the best people in his life were the ones who helped him take care of the things he loved most. That was you. You helped him take care of his company so he could spend time taking care of his daughter. Victoria's eyes filled with tears as she realized Emma had understood something about her father's relationship with Rebecca that she herself had missed. She's right, Rebecca. You weren't just his assistant. You were his partner in protecting everything he'd built. Rebecca's grip on the dead man's switch loosened slightly, but when he died, no one asked me to the funeral. No one thought I had the right to grieve. That was wrong, Emma said simply. Grown-ups sometimes make mistakes about who gets to be sad when someone dies, but being sad together is better than being sad alone. Victoria made a decision that could cost her everything. She set down the photo albums and stepped back from the platform edge. Rebecca, I'm going to show you something, but you have to promise not to detonate anything until you see it. Victoria, what are you doing? Agent Chen's voice crackled over the radio. Victoria ignored the radio and called to Rebecca. I'm going to throw you something. It's small, and it won't hurt anyone. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket, a letter she'd written to her father every year on the anniversary of his death, but never shared with anyone. Catch, Victoria called, and threw the paper across the gap. Rebecca caught it automatically, her eyes never leaving Victoria's face. As she unfolded the letter and began to read, her expression changed from suspicion to shock, to something that looked almost like relief. Emma couldn't see what the letter said, but she could see Rebecca's face soften as she read. What did you write to your daddy? Victoria's voice was thick with emotion. I wrote that I missed him every day, that I was sorry I couldn't save him, that I hoped I was making him proud by taking care of his company and his employees, and that I wished I could thank Rebecca Morrison for being such a good friend to him when I was too young to understand what he needed. Rebecca's hand began to shake as she reached the end of the letter. You wrote this about me? Every year for 5 years, Victoria confirmed. I never knew how to find you to say it in person. Emma watched Rebecca's face transform as years of anger and grief began to crack, revealing the profound sadness underneath. Sometimes people need permission to stop being angry, Emma observed quietly. Rebecca looked directly at Emma, this small child who had somehow become the catalyst for everything that was happening. What do you think I should do? Emma's answer was immediate and certain. I think you should come down and help the nice lady take care of your daddy's company the right way. Together. Rebecca stood silent for a long moment, looking between the dead man's switch in her hand and the little girl who had offered her something she'd never thought to ask for, partnership instead of revenge. Finally, she set the detonator down on the crane platform and raised her hands in surrender. Agent Chen, she called toward the building, I'm ready to come down now, and I want to tell you everything about the people who really killed James Sterling. As FBI agents swarmed up both sides of the crane to secure the explosives and escort Rebecca down safely, Emma turned to Victoria with a satisfied smile. See? Sometimes the best way to catch bad people is to help sad people stop being sad. Victoria knelt beside Emma on the maintenance platform, 400 feet above the city, and pulled the little girl into a hug that conveyed gratitude beyond words. Emma Rodriguez, she whispered. You just taught me that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important truths. 3 months later, Rebecca Morrison was working as Victoria's director of security, using her insider knowledge to help FBI agents dismantle the criminal network that had killed James Sterling. Marcus had been promoted to vice president of corporate safety, and Emma continued her role as special advisor for interpersonal relations, a title that perfectly described her gift for understanding what people really needed. Emma kept her purple crayon in her desk drawer at Sterling Tower, ready for the next time someone needed help seeing that love shared was always better than love lost. Sometimes the most powerful force in the world comes in the smallest packages, wrapped in the fearless honesty of a child who believes everyone deserves a chance to choose love over anger. And sometimes, that's exactly what the world needs most.